My daughter-in-law took my seat at Christmas dinner and my place in the family. But she forgot one thing. Have you ever walked into a room in a home that you helped pay for, filled with people you raised, and suddenly felt like a ghost? That is exactly where I found myself this past Christmas. I was standing there, holding my famous sweet potato casserole, wearing my best Sunday cardigan, ready to take my rightful place at the head of the table, the spot I've sat in since 1982. But then I saw her, my daughter-in-law. She was settled comfortably into my chair, swirling her wine glass, laughing like she was the Queen of England. And the worst part, not one person, not even my own son, said a word to stop her. It wasn't just a chair, sugar. It was a declaration of war. They thought I was just a senile old woman who would take her plate to the corner and be grateful for scraps. Well, bless their hearts. They had no idea who they were messing with. Now, before I tell you what happened when I marched into that dining room and faced that woman in my chair, I need to back up just a few hours. You have to understand how we got to that breaking point, because a fire like this doesn't just start with a single match. It starts with years of kindling, piled up piece by piece, until one day the whole house goes up in flames. For 40 years, I wasn't just a guest in this family. I was the captain of the ship. From the moment the sun came up on December 25th until the last dish was dried and put away, I was essential. I was the sun that the whole family orbited around, and I took such pride in that warmth. It's funny, or maybe it's tragic, how you don't realize you're slowly freezing to death until you're already numb. That warmth didn't disappear overnight. If it had been a sudden storm, I could have braced myself. But it wasn't a storm. It was a slow, creeping cold that started the day my David brought Jessica home. You have to understand something about my David. He has his father's chin, but he has my eyes. And for the first 30 years of his life, he was my entire world. I worked double shifts at the diner, standing on swollen feet for 12 hours a day just to put that boy through college. I wore the same winter coat for 12 years, honey, so that he could have a new laptop and fit in with the rich kids at the university. I never complained, not once, because a mother's love is a sacrifice that doesn't ask for a receipt. But when Jessica came along, things changed. She was sharp, polished, and modern, and everything about her felt calculated. When she looked at my kitchen, she didn't see a home. She saw a museum exhibit of how poor people lived. She smiled. Oh, she always smiled, but it never reached her eyes. Her eyes were always scanning, assessing, counting. Over the last year, the dynamic began to shift subtly, like a small crack in a windshield that you ignore until it shatters. It started with the small cuts. That's what I call them. Little comments that don't seem like much on their own, but when you add them up, they bleed you dry. I remember last Easter clearly. I had spent all morning making my lemon meringue pie. It's David's absolute favorite, and has been since he was 5 years old. I walked into their kitchen, feeling so proud, and set it down on the counter. Jessica walked over, looked at it with this pitying expression, and said, "Oh, sweetie, that looks so heavy. We're really trying to cut back on sugar this year. I made a fruit tart instead." And just like that, she took my pie that I spent 3 hours making with arthritic hands, and she put it in the pantry, behind the cereal boxes. She didn't even put it on the table. And David, he just looked at the floor. He ate her fruit tart and said it was delicious. That was the moment I felt the chill settle in my bones. I realized then that I was losing him, not to a job, not to a distance, but to her influence. she was rewriting his history and editing me out of the script. But the biggest thing, the thing that makes what happened today so unforgivable, is the house itself. You see, that big, beautiful colonial with the wraparound porch where they live. They act like they own it. They act like they earned it with their hard work. But my name is on the original paperwork. My late husband's life insurance money, every single cent of it, is what paid the down payment. I gave them that check with tears in my eyes because it was my retirement safety net. But David had held my hands and said, "Mom, it's an investment. We'll build a suite for you. You'll always have a home with us." I believed him. Because you believe your children, you have to. You never think that the baby you rocked to sleep is going to grow up and lock you out of the very home you bought for him. That brings me to this morning, Christmas morning. I woke up in my small apartment, the one I moved into to save money so I could help them with their mortgage. It was quiet, too quiet. There were no little feet running, no smell of coffee brewing for a house full of guests, just me and the hum of the refrigerator. I had this feeling in my stomach, right in the pit of my gut, like swallowing a stone. My intuition was screaming at me that something was wrong. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just being a sensitive old woman. "Stop it," I said to the mirror as I applied my lipstick, trying to mask the worry lines on my face. "It's Christmas. Go be with your family." I packed up the car with a heaviness I couldn't explain. I had the sweet potato casserole in the back seat, wrapped in 3 towels to keep it warm, just the way David likes it. I had the gifts, beautifully wrapped with hand-tied bows, because I still believe in presentation. The drive over was a blur of anxiety. I kept rehearsing what I would say. I was going to be cheerful. I was going to kill them with kindness. I was going to ignore Jessica's snide remarks about my clothes or my cooking and just focus on my grandbabies. I wanted to believe that today would be different, that the magic of Christmas would soften her heart. I pulled into the driveway, and my heart sank a little when I saw 3 other cars already there. Jessica's friends, I assumed. The cool crowd. I took a deep breath, grabbed the heavy casserole dish with both hands, and walked up the steps. The cold air was biting, making my knees ache, but I forced a smile onto my face. I reached into my purse for my key, the key I've had since the day they moved in. "Come and go as you please, Mom," David had said when he handed it to me. I slid the key into the lock, expecting the familiar click, but it didn't turn. I frowned, thinking maybe my hand was just weak from the cold. I jiggled it. I tried to wiggle it left and right. Nothing. It was like trying to open a bank vault with a toothpick. I pulled the key out and looked at it, confused. It was the same key I used last week to drop off some laundry. Then I leaned in closer to look at the handle, and my blood went absolutely cold. It wasn't the brass handle that had been there for 5 years. It was shiny, new, nickel-plated. They had changed the locks. On Christmas morning, without telling me, I stood there on the porch, the wind whipping my hair across my face, holding a cooling casserole dish, and I felt like I had been punched in the chest. Inside, I could hear muffled laughter. I could hear music rockin' around the Christmas tree, playing loudly. They were having a party, my family, in the house I paid for, and I was standing on the doormat like a solicitor. For a full minute, I just trembled. Part of me, the part of me that was hurt and humiliated, wanted to turn around, get back in my car, and drive away. To save my dignity. To disappear like they clearly wanted me to. But then I looked down at that casserole. I thought about the check I wrote for that house. I thought about my David inside, likely being told by her that I was running late or probably forgot. and something in me snapped. Not a loud snap, but a firm one. The sadness evaporated, and in its place came a spark of righteous anger. I wasn't going to fade away. I wasn't going to let her win this easily. I raised my hand that was shaking with a mix of cold and rage, and I balled it into a fist. Bang, bangs, bang. I hammered on that wood until my knuckles hurt. The music inside didn't stop, but the laughter died down instantly. I waited, staring at the wood grain, breathing hard, vapor puffing out into the cold air. I whispered to myself, fierce and low, "Open the door, David. Don't you dare leave your mother out in the cold. You open this door right now, or so help me God, I will knock it down." The door didn't fly open immediately. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, listening to the silence on the other side, knowing they were hesitating, knowing they were deciding who would have to deal with the problem on the porch. Finally, I heard the heavy deadbolt slide back, the sound of that new, expensive lock clicking into place, and the door creaked open just a crack. It wasn't my David who greeted me. It wasn't my grandbabies rushing to hug my legs. It was Jessica. She stood there in a pristine white cashmere sweater that looked like it would stain if you even breathed on it wrong, holding a glass of champagne. She didn't open the screen door right away. She just looked at me through the mesh, her smile tight and practiced, like a pageant contestant who just lost, but still has to pose for the camera. "Oh, Gran," she said, her voice high and breathless. "We didn't hear you. The music was so loud. Why didn't you just use your key?" I stared at her, my hand tightening around the handle of my casserole dish. The audacity. She knew exactly why I didn't use my key. But I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of a scene on the front porch. "My key didn't work, dear," I said, keeping my voice level, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "Must be the cold weather." She gave a little laugh, a tinkling, hollow sound, and finally pushed the door open. "Oh, that's right. David changed the hardware last week. Safety upgrade, you know. With all the packages being stolen these days, we just couldn't be too careful. I told him to call you, but you know how forgetful men get." She stepped back to let me in, but she didn't offer to take the heavy dish from my hands. She didn't offer to take my coat. She just turned on her heel and walked back into the hallway. Expecting me to follow like a stray dog, she'd reluctantly let in out of the rain. I stepped across the threshold, and the moment I was inside, I felt like I had walked onto a movie set instead of my son's home. I stopped dead in my tracks. The breath actually hitched in my throat. For years, this house had been warm. I'm talking about deep reds, forest greens, plaid blankets thrown over the sofa, and the smell of real pine. But this was sterile. Everything was white. The walls were white. The rug was white. The tree, my God, the tree was covered in nothing but clear glass balls and white ribbons. "Where are the ornaments?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I looked at the tree, searching for the history. Where was the macaroni star David made in first grade? Where was the felt reindeer with the missing eye that my late husband bought for our first Christmas together? Those ornaments were heirlooms. They were our story. Jessica called out from the dining room, not even looking back. "Oh, those old things. They're in the attic, Gran. We wanted a more elevated look this year. Something cleaner. You know, less clutter." Clutter, that's what she called 40 years of memories. Clutter. I felt a sting behind my eyes, but I blinked it away. I wasn't going to cry, not yet. I walked further inside, clutching my casserole like a shield. I needed something familiar. I needed to be useful. In my family, you don't just show up and sit down, you work. You contribute. I headed straight for the kitchen. That kitchen was my sanctuary. I taught David how to scramble eggs on that stove. I knew exactly which burner ran a little hot and which drawer stuck if you pulled it too hard. I pushed through the swinging door, ready to roll up my sleeves. I brought the sweet potatoes, I announced, trying to sound cheerful. I'll just pop them in the oven to keep warm, and then I can help with the gravy. I know how tricky that turkey drippings can be if you don't whisk it just right. I didn't even make it to the counter. Jessica was there in a flash, moving faster than I've ever seen her move. She physically blocked my path, standing between me and the stove with her hands raised, palms out, like she was stopping traffic. No, 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 she chirped, her eyes wide and frantic. Gran, stop. We have a system going. The caterer is handling the main courses this year. I froze. The caterer. Yes, she said, smoothing her white sweater. It's just so much easier. And honestly, Gran, and I mean this with love, you know how you get in the kitchen. You tend to drizzle. And with the new marble countertops, we really can't have grease splatters everywhere. It stains so easily. She looked pointedly at my casserole dish, wrapped in its old, clean kitchen towels. And we really don't have oven space for extra sides. The menu is already set. It's a French theme this year. I stood there, feeling the heat rise up my neck. I wasn't just being told I wasn't needed. I was being told I was a liability. I was messy. I was slow. I was the old woman who spills things and ruins the aesthetic. My sweet potato casserole, the one David used to beg for, the one he said was the only thing that made it feel like Christmas, was now just extra. Here, she said, taking the dish from me with 2 fingers, holding it away from her body like it was radioactive. I'll just put this in the utility room for now. It's cold in there, it should keep. Why don't you go sit in the living room? David's in there. Just relax, be a guest. Be a guest in the house I paid for, in the family I built. I turned around without a word, my hands feeling empty and light without the dish. I walked back out into the hallway. The house was filling up with people I didn't know. Couples in their 30s, friends of theirs, people who looked right through me as they balanced tiny plates of hors d'oeuvres. I scanned the room for David. I finally saw him near the fireplace, holding a tumbler of scotch. But he wasn't laughing. He wasn't playing the happy host. He looked haunted. He was gripping that glass so hard his knuckles were white. He was sweating despite the chill in the room, and his eyes were darting around nervously, checking the clock on the mantelpiece every 30 seconds. When our eyes finally met across the room, he didn't smile. He didn't wave. He looked terrified. He quickly looked down at his shoes and took a large gulp of his drink, physically turning his body away from me. That reaction hurt worse than Jessica's insults. He was hiding. He knew something was coming, and he was too coward to face me. I drifted toward the corner of the room, to a stiff, modern armchair that looked about as comfortable as a park bench. I sat down, smoothing my skirt, feeling invisible. I watched him. I watched my son avoid me for 20 minutes. He spoke to everyone else, but he kept a wide berth around my corner, like I was a contagious disease. Eventually, the silence of my isolation became too loud. I needed a moment. I needed to splash some cold water on my face and compose myself before dinner. I hoisted myself up out of that low chair, my knees protesting, and made my way down the hall toward the powder room. The powder room is right next to the kitchen. The old swinging door doesn't close all the way. The hinges have been loose since 1998. As I approached, I heard voices. Hushed, urgent. I stopped. I know I shouldn't have eavesdropped. My mother raised me better than that. But when you hear your name whispered in a tone like that, you stop. You listen. David, look at her, Jessica's voice hissed. It wasn't the sweet, high-pitched voice she used with me. It was low and hard. She's moping in the corner. It's bringing the whole vibe down. This is exactly why we need to do this. Jess, please, David's voice replied. He sounded pained, his voice cracking. Can't we just wait until after the holidays? It's Christmas. I can't just drop a bomb like that on her today. Did you see her face when you took the casserole? My breath caught in my throat. My hand went to my chest. No, David, Jessica snapped. I heard the clink of glass on marble. We are not waiting. We have the appointment set for next week. If you don't tell her today, she's going to think she can just keep existing like this. Hovering, we need the space. We need to move forward. You promised me. There was a silence, a long, heavy silence. Just tell her today, David, she whispered, and the cruelty in her voice chilled me more than the winter air outside. Get it over with, before dinner. I don't want her making a scene when the guests are seated. I stood there in the hallway, the blood rushing in my ears. Get it over with. The appointment. We need the space. I backed away slowly, forgetting about the bathroom. I moved quietly back toward the living room, my mind racing. What appointment? What did they mean, we need the space? They weren't just talking about a nursing home. I've visited friends in those places. You don't make an appointment just to look. This sounded final. This sounded like they were planning to cut me out like a cancer. I sat back down in that hard chair, but I wasn't sad anymore. The shock was wearing off, and the survival instinct was kicking in. They were planning something big, and they were going to spring it on me today in front of all these people, so I would be too embarrassed to fight back. Well, I thought, gripping the armrests of the chair until my knuckles turned white. Let them try. The summons didn't come with a shout of "dinner's ready," like it used to when I was cooking. Back in my day, I would wipe my hands on my apron, stand at the bottom of the stairs, and holler for the boys to wash up. It was loud. It was messy. It was real. But in this new, white, sterile house, dinner was announced with a bell. A little crystal bell. Ting, ting, ting. I saw Jessica standing in the archway of the dining room, ringing that little bell like she was summoning the staff at a Victorian manor. Dinner is served, everyone, she announced, her voice singing through the room. Please, come find your seats before the souffle falls. The chatter in the living room died down. The guests, those strangers who looked right through me, began to file toward the dining room. I took a deep breath. I pushed myself up from that hard armchair, my joints popping in the silence of my own corner. I smoothed my skirt. I checked my cardigan buttons. I told myself, all right, Gran, chin up. You are the mother of this family. You paid for this roof. You go in there and you sit at the head of the table like you always have, and you show them that you are still here. I walked slowly. I let the others go first. I wanted to make an entrance, perhaps. Or maybe I was just dreading what I would find. My feet knew the way. They knew the path to that dining room table better than they knew the layout of my own apartment. I had walked that path carrying turkeys, birthday cakes, sick children, and piles of laundry for 40 years. I walked through the archway, and for a second, I was blinded by the candlelight. She had gone all out, I'll give her that. There were tall, tapered candles everywhere. The table was set with gold chargers and crystal glasses that sparkled under the chandelier. It looked beautiful. It looked like a magazine. It didn't look like Christmas, but it looked expensive. I scanned the table. There were 12 seats, and my eyes went automatically, instinctively, to the head of the table. The seat facing the window, the seat with the armrests, the captain's chair. That was my seat. It had been my husband's seat until he passed. And then, by rights, by tradition, by the sheer weight of my grief and my labor, it became mine. It was where I sat to carve the ham. It was where I sat to lead the grace. It was the throne from which I watched my family grow. I started walking toward it. I didn't even think about it. It was muscle memory. But as I got closer, I stopped. I stopped so abruptly that the person behind me, one of Jessica's friends, bumped into my shoulder. "Excuse me," she muttered, stepping around me. But I didn't hear her. I couldn't hear anything but the roaring in my ears. Because there, sitting in my chair, was Jessica. She was already seated. She looked comfortable, too comfortable. She was leaning back against the wood, my wood, with one arm draped casually over the armrest. In her other hand, she held a large glass of deep red wine, swirling it slowly, hypnotically. The dark liquid coated the glass like blood, swirling round and round as she laughed at something the man to her right was saying. She tilted her head back, exposing her long, elegant neck. She looked like a queen holding court. And I was the peasant standing in the mud. I stood there, frozen. My hand was half raised, as if I was about to pull the chair out. I waited. Surely she would see me. Surely she would realize her mistake. I thought maybe she's just sitting there for a moment. Maybe she's just testing the view. I cleared my throat, a soft, polite sound. Jessica stopped laughing. She turned her head slowly and looked at me. Her eyes met mine. And in that moment, honey, I knew. There was no mistake. There was no confusion. She looked at me with a flat, calm expression. She didn't flinch. She didn't scramble to get up and say, "Oh my gosh, Gran, I'm so sorry. I took your spot." No, she took a sip of that red wine. Her eyes locked on mine over the rim of the glass. It was a challenge, silent and brutal. She was telling me, without speaking a word, this is my house now. This is my table. You are done. The room seemed to go quiet. Maybe it didn't. Maybe everyone was still talking. But to me, the silence was deafening. I looked at David. He was sitting to her right, in the first man's seat. He was looking down at his napkin, folding it over and over again with nervous, trembling fingers. "David," I said, my voice sounded thin, wobbly. "David, honey." He didn't look up. "David," I said, a little louder this time. "Jessica is in my seat." It sounded childish as soon as I said it. She's in my seat, like a toddler fighting over a toy. But it wasn't a toy. It was my dignity. David finally looked up. His face was red. He looked miserable. He looked at Jessica, then he looked at me. I saw the conflict in his eyes. I saw the little boy who used to hide behind my legs when it stormed. I prayed right then and there. "Please, David, be a man. Stand up for your mother just this once." He opened his mouth, And then he closed it. He looked at Jessica again. She raised one eyebrow, just a fraction of an inch, a warning. David turned back to me, and the light went out of his eyes. "Mom," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "Mom, just sit on the side today, okay?" I felt like I had been slapped. "Excuse me," I whispered. "Just sit on the side," he said a little louder, a little more irritated now because I was making him feel guilty. Jessica put a lot of work into this arrangement. The seating chart it's set. Please, don't make a scene. Don't make a scene. That is the weapon they always use against us, isn't it? Our generation, we were raised to be polite, to be composed, to never wash our dirty laundry in public. And they use that against us. They know we will swallow glass before we scream in front of strangers. I looked around the table. The guests were watching now. My grandchildren, little Sophie and Tyler, were watching. Sophie, my sweet 8-year-old granddaughter, piped up. "Grandma, why aren't you sitting at the top? You always sit at the top." Bless the innocence of children. They speak the truth that adults are too cowardly to say. Jessica smiled at Sophie, a sickly sweet smile. "Grandma is going to sit next to you today, sweetie," she chirped. "Isn't that nice? We thought Grandma would be more comfortable, out of the way of the kitchen traffic." Out of the way. I looked at the seat they had left for me. It was at the far end of the side, right near the kitchen door. It wasn't even a dining chair. It was a folding chair. A wooden folding chair brought up from the basement, because the table was set for 12, and their fancy matching set only had 10 chairs. So I was the afterthought. I was the 11th wheel. I stood there for one more heartbeat. Every fiber of my being wanted to flip that table over. I wanted to grab the tea, tablecloth, and yank it, sending the crystal and the gold chargers and the red wine crashing to the floor. I wanted to scream, "I paid for this table. I paid for this house. I paid for the college degree that got you that job, David." But I didn't, because I am a lady, and because I knew with a sudden crystal clear clarity that if I screamed now, I would lose. They would call me crazy. They would call me senile. They would use my anger as proof that I needed that appointment they whispered about. So I swallowed the scream. I swallowed the pride, and it tasted like ash in my throat. "Of course," I said, my voice was ice cold. "I wouldn't want to disrupt the aesthetic." I walked to the folding chair. I sat down. I was 3 inches lower than everyone else. I looked like a child sitting at the grown-ups' table. Jessica smiled, satisfied. She raised her glass. "To family," she said. "To family," everyone echoed. David mumbled it into his chest. I didn't say a word. I just sat there, shrinking into that hard wooden chair, watching the woman who stole my son sit on my throne. But as I watched her, as I watched the smug way she sipped that red wine, something shifted inside me. The sadness began to harden. The grief began to calcify into something sharper. "You took my seat, Jessica, but you have made a grave mistake, because you forgot that I am the one who knows where all the bodies are buried, and I am the one who controls the inheritance. Enjoy your wine, dear, because it's the last expensive thing you're going to taste for a very, very long time." If you have never sat in a wooden folding chair while everyone else is sitting on velvet cushions, let me tell you, it does something to your spirit. It isn't just that it's hard or that my sciatica started flaring up the moment I sat down. It's that it's unstable. Every time I shifted my weight, the chair creaked. A loud, dry CRRR creak that echoed through the dining room. It was humiliating. It was a constant audio reminder to everyone at the table that something doesn't fit here. Something is cheap. Something is temporary. And because the chair was lower, I found myself looking up at everyone. My chin was barely clearing the edge of the table. I felt like a toddler who needed a booster seat, or worse, a beggar waiting for scraps at a banquet. The first course came out. A salad, arugula and roasted beets with some kind of white foam on top. It looked like lawn clippings that had been sneezed on. I poked at it with my fork. I was hungry. I hadn't eaten all day because I was saving my appetite for the big meal. But my stomach was tied in such a tight knot, I didn't think I could swallow a bite. I tried to be normal. I tried to do what I have always done, facilitate the conversation, connect the family. That's what grandmothers do, isn't it? We weave the threads of the past into the present so the fabric doesn't tear. I cleared my throat, forcing a smile, looking for an opening in the chatter. This reminds me of the Christmas of '98, I said, projecting my voice a little to be heard over the clinking silverware. Remember, David, we had that terrible snowstorm and the power went out for 2 days. We had to cook the turkey in the fireplace. I looked at David, hoping for a shared smile, a memory, a lifeline. I wanted him to remember who we were before this. He started to smile, a flicker of genuine nostalgia crossing his face. Yeah, I remember. Dad was so mad he almost burned his eyebrows off trying to. Babe, could you pass the salt? Jessica cut in. She didn't shout. She didn't look angry. She just spoke right over me, right over David, as if I hadn't spoken at all. As if my voice was just background noise, like the hum of the refrigerator or the wind outside. David stopped mid-sentence. He blinked, the memory fading from his eyes like a candle being blown out by a draft. He reached for the salt cellar. Sure, here. I waited a beat. I tried again. I am a resilient woman. I raised my voice just a fraction. Your father, I continued, pressing on because I refused to be silenced in my own history. He used to say that was the best turkey we ever had because it tasted like survival. So, Eric, Jessica said, turning her entire body toward the guest on her left, effectively turning her back to me. Tell us about the ski trip to Aspen. Did you guys stay at the lodge, or did you rent a chalet? And just like that, the conversation turned. The table erupted into talk about skiing, about resorts, about expensive gear, about lift tickets. Nobody asked me if I skied. I don't, my hips would shatter. Nobody asked me what I thought about Aspen. I sat there in my creaky low chair, gripping my fork, realizing that I was being actively edited out of the conversation. It wasn't accidental. I've been around long enough to know the difference between a lull in conversation and a wall. Jessica was building a wall, brick by brick, every time she interrupted me. She was signaling to the room, her stories don't matter. Her past doesn't matter. She is irrelevant. Ignore her. Then came the main course. The caterers cleared the salad plates and brought out the turkey. It was sliced perfectly thin, fanned out on a platter like a deck of cards. It looked dry. There was no steam rising from it, no smell of sage and onion. Just meat. Cold, precise meat. But I looked for the sides. Specifically, I looked for the gravy. You have to understand, my gravy is famous in this county. It's a 3-day process. I boil the giblets, I roast the neck, I use the drippings, I whisk it by hand until my wrist aches. It is liquid gold. David used to drink it from a mug when he was a teenager. I had brought a quart of it with me in a mason jar, tucked into the bag with the gifts, and I had handed it to Jessica in the hallway earlier when she took the casserole. "Is there any gravy?" I asked, looking at the dry turkey on my plate. Jessica stopped sipping her red wine. She set the glass down. It left a faint red ring on the white tablecloth, a stain she didn't seem to mind. "Oh," she said, waving her hand dismissively, not even looking at me. "We didn't use it, Gran." I froze. "You didn't use it?" "No," she said, picking up her knife. I opened the jar and looked at it, and there was just so much separated fat on top. It looked incredibly unhealthy. David's cholesterol is borderline, you know. We can't be eating that kind of heavy grease anymore. I stared at her. "So, where is it?" "I poured it down the sink," she said, stabbing a piece of a steamed asparagus spear with her fork. "I rinsed the jar out for you, though. It's in your bag." I opened a jar of that organic beef juice from Whole Foods instead. It's much lighter. "Pass the boat to Gran, David." I felt the blood drain from my face. She poured it down the sink. 3 days of work, 3 days of love. The smell of my kitchen, the tradition of my mother and her mother before her, poured down a drain like dirty dishwater. It wasn't about the gravy. It's never about the gravy. It was about the message. She was telling me that my love was toxic, that my care was unhealthy, that the way I loved my son with rich food and warm memories was something that needed to be washed away to make room for her clean, elevated, store-bought life. I looked at David. Surely this would break him. Surely the man who used to beg for that gravy would say something. David was cutting his turkey. He was sawing at it, actually, because it was tough. He put a piece of the dry meat into his mouth, chewed and swallowed. He reached for the organic juice, a thin, watery brown liquid in a boat, and poured it over his plate. He didn't look at me. He ate the silence, and that hurt more than the hunger. I looked down at my own plate. The food looked like plastic. It had no soul. I realized then that they were starving me. Not physically, there was plenty of food, but emotionally. They were starving me of connection, starving me of respect, starving me of my role as the nurturer. I put my fork down, clink. The sound was sharp in the quiet room. I couldn't eat. If I opened my mouth to take a bite, I was afraid a sob would come out instead. And I would not cry. Not here, not in front of her. I sat back in my folding chair. I folded my hands in my lap, and I watched them eat. I watched them enjoy their soulless, expensive dinner. And as I watched Jessica wipe the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin, a cold, hard realization settled over me. They didn't just want my seat. They didn't just want my house. They wanted to erase me. They wanted a version of this family where grandma was just a photo on a shelf, silent, distant, and dead. Not a living, breathing woman with opinions and needs, and a voice. Well, I looked at the grandfather clock in the corner. It was almost time for gifts. If they wanted to erase me, They should have checked the bank accounts first, because the woman they were treating like a ghost was about to become a poltergeist. Now, before we move forward to what the lawyer did the next morning, I need you to understand something. You're probably wondering, Gran, if you were so mad, why on earth did you hand them $15,000 in checks right before you left? You might think I was just being a soft-hearted old fool. You might think I was trying to buy their love one last time. No, honey, I gave them that money because of what happened in the bathroom 10 minutes before the gift exchange. I didn't give them those checks out of guilt. I gave them out of strategy. I wanted them fat and happy. I wanted them to feel so safe, so victorious, that they wouldn't see the knife coming until it was already twisted. Let me take you back to that moment. Right after the dinner, after the organic juice, and the silence, I excused myself. I couldn't look at their faces for one more second without screaming, so I mumbled something about needing to freshen you, and ducked into the powder room in the hallway. I pushed the door shut. It was the one with the loose hinges, the one David promised to fix 3 years ago. I had to lift the handle and jiggle it hard just to get the latch to catch. Click. Even the door was fighting me. As soon as I was alone, my legs gave out. I slumped against the vanity, gripping the cold porcelain sink to keep from sliding to the floor. I looked up at the mirror. I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. I leaned in close. I didn't look at the wrinkles. I looked at the eyes. Those were the same eyes that used to stay open for 48 hours straight when David had the chicken pox. Those were the same eyes that read him the Velveteen Rabbit 1,000 times, doing all the voices until my throat was sore. Those were the same eyes that spotted his fever from across a playground before he even knew he was sick. And now those eyes looked red, watery, defeated. You fool, I whispered to my reflection. You thought love was a currency. You thought if you paid enough in sacrifice, they would owe you respect. I reached for a tissue to dab my eyes. I needed to fix my face. I couldn't let them see me broken. But just as I was reaching for the box, I heard footsteps outside the door. Because the door didn't fit the frame right, there was a gap at the bottom. The sound traveled right through. Grandma has been in there a long time, I heard a small voice say. It was Sophie, my granddaughter. My heart softened for a second. At least she noticed. Is Grandma sick? Sophie asked. I heard her making noises. Is she crying? I froze. I held my breath, the tissue hovering midair. Then I heard the click of heels on the hardwood. Jessica. No, sweetie, Jessica's voice came through the gap. It wasn't kind. It wasn't concerned. It was dismissive. Grandma isn't sick. She's just confused. Confused? Sophie asked. Yes, Jessica sighed, and I could hear the impatience in her tone. Grandma's mind isn't what it used to be. She gets emotional over nothing. She imagines things. That's why she's crying. She probably forgot where she is. My blood ran cold. Is that why she sits in the little chair? Sophie asked. Exactly, Jessica said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. We have to treat Grandma like a little kid now, okay? Because her brain is shrinking. So if she says anything weird, or if she seems mad, just ignore it. She doesn't know what she's saying. Okay, Mommy, Sophie said. I stood there in that bathroom, gripping the edge of the sink so hard I thought the porcelain might crack. Her brain is shrinking. Just ignore it. She wasn't just being mean. She was poisoning my relationship with my grandchildren. She was actively teaching them to view me not as their grandmother, but as a burden, a broken toy, a senile old woman whose love and words were worthless. I looked at myself in the mirror one last time, and that was when the tears stopped. Instantly, I looked at the woman in the glass, and I didn't see a victim anymore. I saw a strategist. "You think I'm confused?" I whispered to the door, my voice trembling not with grief, but with a cold, sharp rage. "You think my brain is shrinking?" I straightened my cardigan. I reapplied my lipstick bright red, like war paint. "Fine," I said to my reflection. "If she wants a senile old woman, I'll give her one." I formulated the plan right then and there. I would go out there. I would smile. I would apologize for being emotional. And I would give them the checks. Why? Because if I gave them $15,000, they would think they had won. They would think I was buying my way back in. They would think, "See, she's weak. She's desperate. We have her exactly where we want her." They would take that money and they would let their guard down. They would spend it in their heads before they even got to the bank. And that would make the fall so much harder. I unlocked the door. I walked out into that hallway with a smile plastered on my face, clutching those checks in my purse. I wasn't paying them for the roof. I was paying for the element of surprise. You might be thinking, "Gran, if you were so angry in the bathroom, why didn't you just march out there and flip the table right then?" Because, honey, rage without information is just a temper tantrum. And I am not a toddler. I am a matriarch. When I stepped out of that powder room, I wasn't ready to face them yet. I had dried my eyes, yes. I had put my mask back on, but I needed one more minute of strength before I walked into the lion's den. So instead of turning left toward the living room where the party was buzzing, I turned right. I walked down the dark hallway toward the back of the house, toward the den. That room used to be my husband's sanctuary. It was where he smoked his pipe, where he read his Western novels, and where he taught David how to tie a tie. Even though Jessica had updated the rest of the used with her sterile white furniture, she mostly left the den alone. David had insisted. I slipped inside and closed the door quietly behind me. The room was dim, lit only by the standby light of the computer monitor. But as I walked past the desk, I heard a sound, a soft whirring. I looked at the printer on the credenza. The little green light was blinking. I reached out and touched the top of it. The plastic was warm. David must have printed something right before the party started, probably in a rush, and forgotten to grab it in the chaos of the guests arriving. I looked at the output tray. There was a stack of fresh, warm paper sitting there. Now I know I shouldn't snoop, but when a printer is running on Christmas Day, it usually isn't printing carols. Curiosity got the better of me. I picked up the stack. I put on my reading glasses, which hung on a chain around my neck, and I looked at the header on the first page. Petition for removal of trustee due to incapacity. My heart stopped. I flipped to the next page. It was a real estate contract. Notice of intent to sell. Parcel 404, North Creek Township. My breath hitched. Parcel 404. That wasn't just land. That was the creekside property. 40 acres of timber and a small fishing cabin that my father had bought in 1960. It was the land where I learned to fish. It was the land where David caught his first bass. When Henry died, I didn't just give that land to David. I wasn't that foolish. I put it into the Henry and Mary Family Trust. I made David the beneficiary, meaning he gets it when I die. But I remained the trustee. That means as long as I am alive and breathing, nobody can sell that land without my signature. Nobody. Unless I looked back at the first document, due to incapacity, unless the trustee is declared mentally incompetent. I flipped the page again. There was a business plan attached. Proposal, Luminosity Wellness Spa and Boutique. Prepared by Jessica Miller Davis. I felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with the turkey. I started reading Jessica's vision statement. It was filled with buzzwords like holistic curation and luxury aesthetic. But then I got to the funding section. Initial capital investment, $450,000. Source of funds, liquidation of trust assets, Creekside parcel. I dropped the paper like it was burning my fingers. They weren't selling the land because they were in trouble. They weren't selling it because David had a medical emergency. They were selling my father's legacy, my husband's hunting grounds, to build a spa, to build a vanity project for Jessica, so she could play businesswoman with my family's inheritance. I sat there in the dark, staring at the warm printer. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together so hard it made me dizzy. The folding chair to make me feel small. The memory care brochure. The "we need the space" comment. The whispered insults to my granddaughter about my shrinking brain. It wasn't just meanness. It was a legal strategy. They knew they couldn't sell the land while I was the trustee. They needed me out of the way. And since I'm healthy as a horse, they couldn't wait for me to die. So they decided to kill my reputation instead. They needed to build a case that I was confused, aggressive, and senile. They needed witnesses like the guests at the party tonight to see me acting crazy. So they could go to a judge and say, "See, Your Honor, she can't manage the trust anymore. We need to take over." They were constructing a narrative of a senile old woman so they could strip me of my rights and liquidate the assets to fund her boutique. I looked at the papers again, and that was when the sadness finally died. Completely. There was no more grief, no more poor David, no more I hope they love me. It was replaced by something hot, something primal. It was the mama bear instinct. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't the mama bear protecting her cub. I was the mama bear realizing that her cub had grown up into a hyena. And now I had to protect myself. "You want to sell my daddy's land?" I whispered to the empty room. "You want to turn my history into a facial peel?" I reached into my purse. I touched the checkbook. I realized then that the $15,000 in checks I was planning to give them, it was nothing. It was bait. If I walked out there and screamed, I would just prove their point. I would look crazy. But if I walked out there and gave them money, if I smiled, if I acted like a sweet, compliant, slightly confused old lady, They would think they had won. They would think the incapacity plan was working. Greed makes people stupid. If I fed their greed, they would lower their guard. They would stop looking for the knife in my hand. I stood up. I carefully placed the papers back in the tray. I smoothed my skirt. I looked at the photo of my late husband on the desk. "Don't worry, Henry," I said softly. "They aren't getting the land, and they aren't getting the spa. In fact, I don't think they're going to like what they get at all." I walked to the door. My hands weren't shaking anymore. My heart wasn't racing. I felt calm, the terrifying calm of a woman who has just realized she holds the kill switch. I opened the door and walked back toward the living room, toward the Christmas tree, toward the checks I was about to write. I was going to give them the money. I was going to smile. Because tomorrow morning, when I called the lawyer, I was going to burn their whole world down. Walking back down that hallway, away from the warm printer and the damning evidence in the den, was the longest walk of my life. Every instinct in my body wanted to scream. I wanted to run into that living room, grab my son by the shoulders, and shake him until his teeth rattled. I wanted to throw those papers in Jessica's face and scream, "I know you're trying to break the trust. I know you're trying to have me declared incompetent so you can pave over my father's legacy." But I didn't, because if I screamed, I was just a crazy old woman. If I screamed, I was playing right into their hands. I was giving them the evidence they needed for the judge. No, I had to be smarter than that. I stopped at the edge of the living room rug. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of that artificial pine candle. I put a smile on my face, not a happy smile, a tired, defeated, I surrender smile. I walked back to my spot, back to the little wooden folding chair in the corner. The room went quiet when I sat down. They were all watching me, waiting for the explosion. They had heard the banging on the door earlier. They were expecting a scene. Jessica was holding her breath, her hand tightening around her wine glass. I looked at her. I softened my eyes. I slumped my shoulders just a fraction, making myself look smaller, older. "Jessica, dear," I said, my voice trembling just enough to sound fragile. "Yes, Gran?" she asked, her eyes sharp. "I've been thinking about what you said," I lied. "About Arizona." I saw the tension drain out of her shoulders instantly. It was like watching a balloon deflate. "Oh," she said, stepping closer. And maybe you're right," I said. "Maybe I am getting a little confused. The winters here are so hard on my joints, and keeping up with the apartment, it is a lot of work." Jessica's face lit up. It was actually sickening to watch. She didn't look happy for me. She looked happy that she had won. She looked like a cat that just cornered a mouse. "Oh, Gran," she gushed, clasping her hands together. "I'm so glad you're being open to this. Honestly, Sunrise Meadows is incredible. It's not like those old nursing homes. It's a lifestyle community." "Is it?" I asked, playing the part of the naive senior. "Tell me about it. Does it have a garden?" I knew the answer. I had seen the brochure, but I needed her to talk. I needed to see how easily the lies rolled off her tongue. "A huge garden," Jessica lied effortlessly. "Acres of flowers, and they have a specialized gardening club. You could grow your tomatoes there, just like you used to." I nodded slowly. "You mean I can grow tomatoes in a courtyard?" I'm not allowed to leave without a code, I thought. And the doctors, I asked, turning my gaze to David. Are they good? David was looking at the floor again. He couldn't meet my eyes. They're the best, Mom, he mumbled. Specialists in memory care. Memory care, I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. It's just a precaution, Jessica interjected quickly. Once you're settled there, we can handle all the complicated paperwork for you. The trust, the properties. It's a lot for you to manage in your condition. David and I can take that burden off your shoulders. Take the burden. That was code for break the bylaws and liquidate the assets. I looked at David. This was it. This was his final exam. I had the papers in my mind, the notice of intent to sell the fishing cabin. He knew about it. He had printed it. He knew exactly what they were planning to do with his father's legacy. David, I said softly, the fishing cabin, the creekside land. His head snapped up. Panic flashed in his eyes. What about it? He asked, his voice tight. If I go to Arizona, I said, watching him closely, will you promise me that you'll keep that land? Will you promise me you'll take your sons fishing there, just like your father took you? You know, I put that in the trust, specifically, so it would stay in the family. The room was silent. Even the guests seemed to sense the weight of the question. David looked at me. Then he looked at Jessica. Jessica narrowed her eyes at him. A silent command. Stick to the script. David swallowed hard. He looked back at me, and I saw the boy I raised die right in front of my eyes. Mom, he said, his voice shaking. Let's not worry about the land right now. The important thing is getting you the care you need. We'll do what's best for the family. We'll do what's best for the family. Not yes, not I promise. He refused to look me in the eye and lie, but he refused to tell me the truth. He chose her. He chose the spa over the fishing cabin. He chose the money over his mother. That was the moment I stopped mourning him. I nodded slowly. I see, I said. Well, that sets my mind at ease. I reached into my purse. I pulled out the envelopes. I'm not going to bore you with the details of what I said next. You already saw that part. I handed them the checks. 10,000 for him. 5,000 for her. But what I want you to notice, what I want you to really see, is their faces. I watched them feign surprise. I watched David stammer his fake thank yous, acting like he wasn't planning to sue me for incompetence the very next day. I watched Jessica's eyes light up with greed as she tucked that check into her pocket, probably already calculating how many marble tiles it would buy for her spa. They took the bait, hook, line, and sinker. They thought they had fooled the crazy old lady. They thought I was paying them a thank you bonus for locking me away. I'm tired now, I announced, standing up. I think I'll go home and start packing. I walked to the door. The guests parted for me, staring at the poor, frail grandmother shuffling away. I reached for the handle, the new nickel-plated handle that had locked me out just hours before. Gran, Jessica called out. I stopped and turned back. She was standing by the tree, holding that glossy brochure up in the air like a trophy. Don't forget your brochure, she said, smiling sweetly. You need to look at the floor plans. I looked at her. I looked at the brochure. I looked at the husband who had betrayed me and the daughter-in-law who had orchestrated my erasure. I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had smiled all night. "I won't forget a thing, dear," I said. And I meant it. I wouldn't forget the folding chair. I wouldn't forget the gravy. I wouldn't forget the shrinking brain comment. And I certainly wouldn't forget the papers in the den. "Not a single thing," I whispered. I opened the door and walked out into the cold, crisp Christmas night. As the door clicked shut behind me, I didn't feel lonely. I felt energized because I knew something they didn't. I knew that tomorrow morning, Arthur was going to serve them with a document that would make that wellness spa look like a pipe dream. They wanted a fight. Well, bless their hearts, they were about to get a war. The morning after Christmas is usually a time for sleeping in, for eating leftovers, for lazy coffee in pajamas. But at 8:00 a.m. on December 26th, I was not in my pajamas. I was wearing my navy blue Sunday suit, the one I wore to my husband's funeral. I was wearing my pearls. And I was sitting in the waiting room of Arthur Henderson's law office, drinking my coffee black, while Jessica and David were likely still sleeping off their wine and self-satisfaction, dreaming of their new spa. I was wide awake. Arthur opened his door at 8:15 a.m. He looked tired. He was wearing a sweater vest and holding a half-eaten bagel. But when he saw the look on my face, he straightened up. "Mary," he said, ushering me in, "I got your message last night. I stopped the checks. Number 104 and 105. They'll bounce higher than a rubber ball." "Good," I said, sitting in the leather chair opposite his desk. "But that's just the appetizer, Arthur. Now I'm ready for the main course." I reached into my purse and pulled out the photos I had taken on my phone. I didn't steal the papers from the den. That would have tipped them off too early. I took high-resolution photos of every single page. I slid the phone across the desk. "They have a petition for removal of trustee drafted," I said. "They're planning to file it next week. They want to declare me mentally incompetent so they can take control of the Henry and Mary family trust." Arthur put on his glasses. He peered at the tiny screen. His eyebrows shot up. "To fund a wellness spa," he read, a scoff escaping his lips. "Using the timber land. They want to sell the fishing cabin," I said. "And they want to use the trust fund to pay for the renovations on the house. They think I'm just a confused old woman who won't notice." Arthur sat back. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Mary," he said seriously, "if they file this, it gets messy. They'll drag you in front of a judge. They'll bring up the folding chair incident. They'll have witnesses saying you were banging on doors and acting erratic. They're building a case." "I know," I said. "That's why I need to strike first." I leaned forward. "The trust pays their mortgage, doesn't it? Now this is the important part, honey. Everyone assumes David owns that big white house, but he doesn't. When we bought that house, I insisted that the deed remain in the name of the trust. I told David it was for asset protection. David and Jessica don't own a single brick of that house. Legally, they are tenants at will. They live there because I allow it. They live there because the trust pays the mortgage." "Yes," Arthur said. "The trust makes a direct distribution to the bank on the first of every month. $2,800. And as the trustee," I said, "I have the power to suspend distributions if I suspect malfeasance or if the beneficiary acts against the interest of the trust. Arthur smiled, a slow, shark-like smile. Or, he added, if the trustee herself is feeling unsure of her capacity. I matched his smile. Exactly, I said. You see, Arthur, if my son and his wife are so concerned about my mental state, if they truly believe my brain is shrinking, then it would be irresponsible of me to manage such complex finances, wouldn't it? Highly irresponsible, Arthur agreed, pulling a legal pad toward him. I think, I said, my voice cool and steady, that we should freeze all trust activity immediately. Pending let's call it a medical review. No land sales, no business investments, and certainly no mortgage payments. Arthur started writing. The scratching of his pen was the most beautiful sound I had heard all year. I'll draft a notice of temporary suspension, Arthur said. I'll cite their own concerns about your health as the reason. We'll freeze the assets to protect the estate while we investigate the validity of the beneficiary's claims. Do it, I said, cut them off every dime. I signed the papers with a steady hand. I walked out of that office feeling 10 feet tall. Then I waited. I went back to my apartment. I watered my plants. I watched my shows. December 26th passed. Silence. December 27th passed. Silence. They were probably still spending the roof money in their heads. Probably shopping for marble tiles for the spa. Then came January 1st, the first of the month, the day the mortgage is due, and the day the checks I wrote on Christmas Eve would attempt to clear. I sat by my phone. I made a pot of tea. I waited. It took 3 days for the banking system to catch up. On January 4th, at 7:30 p.m., my phone rang. It was David. I let it ring twice. I took a sip of my tea, then I picked up. Hello, I answered, sounding cheerful. Happy New Year, David. Mom, his voice was high, panic-stricken. He was hyperventilating. Mom, are you there? Of course I'm here, dear. Is everything all right? No, nothing is all right, he shouted. Mom, the bank called the mortgage payment. It didn't go through. They said the trust account is frozen. Oh my, I said, frozen? That sounds serious. And the checks, he yelled. The check you gave me for the roof, and the one for Jessica. I tried to deposit them, and they bounced. The teller looked at me like I was a criminal. It caused an overdraft in our joint account. Oh dear, I said, keeping my voice calm. That is strange. Mom, what is going on? He demanded. Did you forget to transfer the money? Jessica is freaking out. We have contractors coming tomorrow for the roof. We need that money. I paused. I let the silence stretch out for a long, uncomfortable moment. Well, David, I said slowly, I didn't forget. Then fix it, he screamed. Call the bank, unfreeze the trust. I can't do that, honey, I said. Why not? Because of what Jessica said, I replied. You know, about my brain shrinking. What? David stammered. Mom, don't be. That was just. She was so worried about me, I continued, my voice dripping with fake concern. She said I was confused. She said I was agitated. And you know, I started thinking, maybe she's right. Mom, stop it, David warned. If I'm confused, David, I said, sharpening my tone, then I certainly shouldn't be handling large sums of money. I shouldn't be writing checks. I shouldn't be managing a trust. It wouldn't be safe. Mom, please, he begged. The mortgage is $3,000. We don't have that kind of cash liquid right now. We put everything into the spa deposit. We're tapped out. The spa, I said. Ah, yes. The spa on the land you promised not to sell. The line went dead silent. You know, he whispered. I saw the papers, David, I said. The act was dropped. My voice was now pure steel. I saw the notice of intent to sell. I saw the incapacity petition. I saw it all. Mom, I can explain. Save it, I snapped. You wanted to declare me incompetent. Congratulations. You got your wish. The trust is frozen pending a full legal review of my choosing. That means no mortgage payments, no roof money, no spa. You can't do this, he shouted. We'll lose the house. You don't own the house, David, I said coldly. The trust owns the house. You and Jessica are just tenants. And tenants who try to steal from their landlord don't get to stay. What are you saying? He whispered. I'm revoking your tenancy, I said. Since you tried to defraud the trust, you are no longer welcome on trust property. You're kicking us out. I heard a doorbell ring in the background, on his end of the line. Ding dong. Hold on, David said, panic rising in his voice. Someone is at the door. That would be the courier, I said, taking a sip of my tea. Happy New Year, David. He's serving you with a 30-day notice to vacate. Don't forget to sign for it. It was exactly 30 days later when I returned to the house. I didn't bring a casserole this time. I didn't bring gifts. I brought a folder. A blue legal folder containing a residential lease agreement and a strict set of conditions drafted by Arthur Henderson. David had begged for this meeting. He called it a peace summit. I called it a surrender negotiation. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked different. The Christmas lights were gone, taken down in a hurry. The yard looked a little neglected. It didn't look like a fortress anymore. It looked like what it was, a house with a mortgage that wasn't being paid. I walked up the steps. I didn't reach for my key. I didn't need to. Before I could even knock, the door swung open. It was David. He looked terrible. He had lost weight. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his shirt was wrinkled. He looked like a man who hadn't slept since New Year's Day. Mom, he breathed out, relief washing over his face. Thank you for coming. He stepped aside to let me in. I walked into the hallway. The sterile white decor was still there, but it felt different now. It felt fragile. There were a few moving boxes stacked in the corner. Packing started just in case I didn't show up. Where is she? I asked. In the dining room, David said quietly. She cooked. I raised an eyebrow. She cooked. Meatloaf, David said. She made your recipe, or she tried to. I walked into the dining room. The table was set, but it wasn't set with the gold chargers and the crystal glasses this time. It was set with the everyday plates. There were no caterers, no organic juice, just a slightly burnt meatloaf, some lumpy mashed potatoes, and a pitcher of water. And there was Jessica. She was standing by the window. She wasn't wearing her white cashmere. She was wearing jeans and a simple blouse. She looked smaller, deflated. The arrogance that had filled the room on Christmas Day had evaporated, replaced by the terrified realization that she had overplayed her hand and lost everything. When she saw me, She didn't smile her fake pageant smile. She looked down at the floor. "Hello, Mary," she said softly. She didn't call me Gran. She didn't call me Sweetie. She used my name. That was a start. I didn't answer her immediately. I looked at the table. There were 4 chairs set. One for David, one for Jessica, one for me, and one for Sophie, who was at a sleepover. Thank goodness this wasn't a conversation for children. I looked at the head of the table. My seat, the captain's chair. It was empty. On Christmas, Jessica had lounged in it like a queen. Today, she was standing as far away from it as possible, as if she was afraid it might bite her. I walked over to it. The floorboards creaked, not the chair, but the floor. I placed my blue folder on the table with a heavy thud. I pulled out the chair. I sat down. I settled into the cushion. I placed my hands on the armrests. I looked down the length of the table at the 2 of them. "Sit," I commanded. They sat, David to my right, Jessica to my left. They looked like 2 teenagers who had been called into the principal's office. We wanted to say we're sorry," David started, his voice cracking. "Mom, about Christmas, about the papers, we were just greedy," I finished for him. He flinched. "Desperate," he corrected. "We got over our heads, Mom, the lifestyle, the keeping up with the neighbors. We were drowning in credit card debt. And Jessica thought if we could just get the spa running. So you decided to sell my father's land," I said, my voice hard. "And you decided to tell the world I was crazy so you could remove me as trustee and liquidate the assets." David put his head in his hands. "I know, it was wrong, it was evil. I haven't slept. I've been sick over it." I looked at Jessica. She hadn't spoken. "And you?" I asked. "Do you have anything to say, or are you just waiting for the check?" Jessica looked up. Her eyes were rimmed with red. "I don't expect a check," she whispered. "I know we lost. I know you hold all the cards." "I do," I said, "and don't you ever forget it." I opened the blue folder. "Arthur has drawn up a new arrangement," I announced. "Since you are currently facing eviction, and since neither of you has the income to rent a place like this on your own, I am willing to pause the eviction. Pause it, not cancel it." Hope flickered in David's eyes. "Really?" "Under conditions," I said, sliding the paper across. "The table. Condition number 1, the fishing cabin. I'm not just taking your word for it. Arthur has already filed an amendment to the trust this morning. The land is now designated as a protected legacy asset. That means it can never be sold, mortgaged, or leveraged as long as any of us are alive. If you try to touch it, you automatically forfeit your inheritance." David nodded vigorously. "I understand, I agree." "Condition number 2, I continued, looking at Jessica. The wellness spa idea is dead. You want to work, you can get a job, a real job, with a W-2 form and a boss who isn't you." Jessica swallowed hard, but she nodded. "Okay." "Condition number 3, I said. This house belongs to the trust. That means I am the landlord. You are the tenants. You will sign a month-to-month lease. If you disrespect me, if you lock me out, if you ever roll your eyes at me when I tell a story, I terminate the lease. Am I clear?" "Crystal clear, Mom," David said. "And finally," I said, leaning forward, "the gravy." Jessica blinked. "The gravy. You poured 3 days of my work down the sink because you thought you were better than me," I said. "You thought my traditions were trash." Well, honey, from now on, Christmas is at my apartment. I cook, you eat, and if I serve gravy, you will thank me for it. Jessica looked at me. For a second, I saw a flash of the old defiance. But then she looked at the eviction notice peeking out of the folder. She lowered her head. Yes, Mary, I understand. The room was quiet. The power dynamic had shifted so completely, I could feel the air pressure change. Good, I said, now pass the meatloaf, and David, eat your vegetables. We ate. It wasn't a happy meal. It wasn't warm and fuzzy, but it was respectful. David cried halfway through the meal. He reached out and touched my hand. I missed you, Mom, he whispered. I felt so alone without you. You made yourself alone, David, I told him. But you can earn your way back. When I left that night, I didn't forget anything. I walked out to my car with my head held high. I had my seat back. I had my dignity back. And most importantly, I had my safety back. You know, ladies, we spend our whole lives raising these children. We wipe their noses. We pay for their colleges. We give them the down payments for their houses. We give pieces of ourselves away, day after day, year after year, until we think that love means having nothing left for ourselves. We think that if we give them everything, they'll love us back. But I learned a hard lesson this Christmas. You cannot buy respect. And you certainly cannot rely on loyalty, not even from the people you gave birth to. There's a moment in every woman's life where she has to choose. Do you want to be the sweet, quiet grandma in the corner on the folding chair? The one they whisper about? The one they shove into a home so they can take her money? Or do you want to be the matriarch? Because let me tell you something, being a matriarch isn't about baking cookies. It's about control. It's about knowing where your deed is. It's about keeping your name on the checkbook. It's about making sure that no matter how much you love them, you love yourself enough to keep a safety net that they can't touch. Don't you ever let them make you feel expired. Don't you ever let them trade your dignity for their aesthetic. And if they ever try to take your seat at the head of the table, you don't ask for it back. You take it back. Because, honey, it's your table.